This movie was so close, so damn close to giving us the best Spider-Man trilogy that we had had. And while I do enjoy it, it has a lot of problems and relies way too heavily on emotional capital for its success. It's really a shame too, because with a few minor changes, it could have been great. Like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. If you're new, check out the rest of the channel and let me know what you think. Let's dive into Spider-Man: No Way Home. I love Tom Holland as Spider-Man. I love Cumberbatch as Strange. I love bringing back Tobey and Garfield as mentors for Holland. And I love the choice of villains included in this movie. I will go even so far as to say that upon my first viewing of this movie, I loved it. But over the years, that love has faded. The truth is, this movie has a fun and interesting premise, but it is all built upon foundation of a flawed narrative and cheap nostalgia. Let's start from the top. The overall story this film aims to tell is a very compelling one, but how that story kicks off is my biggest issue, because it makes little to no sense. We start among the aftermath of Mysterio's video announcing Peter's identity to the world. Peter's life and the life of everyone close to him are in shambles. So it stands to reason that Peter would want to figure out a way to alleviate these issues. So he goes to Doctor Strange and requests that he erase Mysterio's revelation from everyone's memory. Then, because Peter interrupts Strange's spell numerous times, it causes a break in the multiverse, allowing the events of this film to play out. This is where the plot goes off the rails for me, because the choices that Strange makes are not consistent with his character. I mean, the proposal of this idea is completely rash and childish, and not to mention immoral. This makes sense coming from Peter because he is a child. He's a teenager. He's thinking completely out of selfishness and isn't pondering the downstream ramifications of such a decision. However, this is a proposal that Doctor Strange should have absolutely shot down entirely immediately upon hearing it. I've seen online people say before that Strange has made childish and reckless decisions, which is completely true. However, all of those decisions came before and during his character arc to where he is today. If we think back on Endgame, for example, everything Strange does and says, every tactic he utilizes is in favor of protecting the universe. In Infinity War, he saved Tony's life, sure, but he didn't do that for Tony. He did that because he saw every outcome and knew that if they ever stood even a 1% chance, that required Tony to be alive. Everything he does post Doctor Strange up until No Way Home is in service of the greater good. Going along with Peter's irrational plan is extremely out of character at this point. Beyond that, during the creation of the spell, why wouldn't Strange discuss all of the finer details with Peter first? Ask him if he had spoken to MIT admissions. Ask him if there is anyone he wants to exclude from the spell's reach. Because this entire setup is just so unsound, it in turn disrupts the whole of the narrative. Now, I think Watts could have corrected this with just a few adjustments. I think you still have Peter go to Strange. Like I said, he's a teenager. He's gonna say, do, and think up stupid shit. But you have to have him go with Ned and MJ. He argues with Strange. Strange chastises him for being selfish, telling him that this situation is terrible, but he chose to be a hero, and with that comes consequences. And Peter is trying to have everything he wants, even though it's impossible. So the trio leave, and let's say Ned takes a few things on his way out. having recently realized that he is a bit in tune with the magical side of this universe. So maybe, after this scene, Ned, MJ, and Peter try to cast a spell themselves, and of course, because they have no idea what they're doing, the spell goes awry, and our villains begin to infiltrate from the multiverse, as well as we get the other two Peters. I think this makes a ton more sense. Actually, come to think of it, I would even say that maybe Ned makes this decision all on his own. If the writers went that route, it would set, one, Ned's future up in the franchise in an interesting way. For those who aren't familiar with the comics, Ned is the alter ego of the Spider-Man villain Hobgoblin, one of the alter egos. So not only would it set up a unique power set for if they decided to go down that road, but it could also set up a rift in Peter and Ned's relationship. From here, I think the majority of the film can play out as is, but maybe give the villains a little more depth in screen time, because most of the time, it just feels like wasted potential, and essentially, they're just nostalgia bait. And listen, this movie exists in the MCU's multiverse stage, so I get it, and it's cool to see these characters back, whose movies weren't always great, but they get deserved send-offs in this one. Obviously, villain-wise, the standouts are Goblin and Ock. Electro's okay, but a little more of him would have been nice, and Sandman and Lizard are just really afterthoughts. I understand these characters had already been established, but not everyone has seen those movies. They do enough in this film to establish the two Peters with simple scene that you don't really have to know the outcomes of the previous films to understand. And you get their Spideys, their older, more established, wiser Spider-Men. And I wish they would have done this with the villains, or just included more of them and more interactions to make us care. I do understand we want to bring all of these villains in. Spider-Man probably, outside of Batman, has the most interesting and expansive roster of villains, but there's no way they'd ever get through all of them cinematically if they go one or even two at a time. My only other very minor complaint is if they wanted to do this, why didn't they just commit to the Sinister Six? I mean, 5 villains? Really? You just needed one more. You could have honestly just brought Mysterio back somehow. It doesn't even have to be Gyllenhaal. There was a whole team behind that villain. And he's already an integral part of this narrative. It's just weird. Now that we got through all that, I do enjoy all the other aspects of this movie. I love May getting to have an Uncle Ben moment. It's emotional and poignant. I enjoy all the villains they chose, like I said, even though I might not love how little screen time some of them get. And the Electro and Goblin redesigns are incredible. I also really appreciate that this trilogy is essentially Holland's Spider-Man origin story. People love Spidey because he's an everyman. He's a struggling, ordinary kid who has to rely on his own intelligence and skill set to navigate his world. However, his history in this universe has been guided by an abundance of advanced Stark technology, as well as help from other Avengers. This has led to some understandable criticisms. But in the conclusion of No Way Home, Peter is alone. Everyone has forgotten who he is. He has nowhere to go. He rents a very humble apartment, and now that he has been separated from his technological crutch, he creates his own suit and ventures out to face life all on his own. This is what the fans have been wanting, and I'm okay with this origin taking 3 films to play out. I just think it made the character even more deep. The action in this movie is one of the highlights. From a narrative perspective, this is probably the worst in the trilogy, but from a pure entertainment value, it may be the best. The initial Goblin fight in Happy's building is unrelenting and brutal. It's the psychotic and destructive Goblin I've always wanted to see on screen. The Ock attack on the bridge is a lot of fun. Strange and Peter's tussle in the mirror dimension is a cool way to see Peter utilize his intellect to outsmart Strange. And the finale is fantastic. We get to see a ton of interesting team-ups and interactions, as well as some really emotional character moments. It's great. Spider-Man No Way Home isn't bad, it's just a frustratingly empty film because of some minor narrative choices. And this film was in production hell for a bit of time as well. But this cast is incredible, the action is superb, and the emotions are there. They're raw and they're moving. But because the setup for this story is so nonsensical and irrational, it deprives this film from the magic that makes movies like this one great. Once you get through all of the exciting reveals and crazy action set pieces, it just sort of feels empty. And that's because this movie isn't character driven, it's nostalgia driven. It's driven off the wow factor. It is incredibly entertaining, but it could have been so much more.